Hello, everybody. Big, giant welcome to everyone who's joining us this afternoon or this morning, depending on where in the world you are. We're really excited today to welcome Shirley, our wonderful guest from Greenmark Environmental, to talk to us today about ISO certification and specifically 14001. This is a topic that has come up a lot with our customers, people I've talked to, and I think the biggest challenge has really been, well, how do I do it practically? How do I make it easy? I have to do this or I want to do this, but it seems too complicated. And really excited to talk with Shirley today and hear from her about how to make this kind of accessible and easy to do. So I'll leave it to Shirley to do her presentation. After that, I'll do a short presentation on greenhouse gas emissions and how to calculate that and how it kind of fits in. And then at the end, we'll have lots of time for questions. So just in terms of housekeeping, all throughout the presentation, please leave your questions in the comments on LinkedIn and I will monitor them and then we'll answer them at the end. But please feel free to ask your questions at any point throughout the presentation and then we'll get to them at the end. Thank you so much for joining. And if you did register, we will be sending a recording of this out at the end as well. So if you have to drop off partway through, that's all good. We'll send the recording afterwards. So without further ado, introducing Shirley, and I'll let her take the floor from here.
Hi to all, and thanks, Carbonhound, for this great opportunity to talk about the connection between ISO 14001 and carbon management. So for me, it all started when I was in new products innovation and I launched Lysol wipes. It was an instant success. But when I looked at the high display of Lysol wipes at Loblaws one day, up almost to the ceiling, I suddenly saw it as a huge pile of waste, like a mountain. So then I thought, I'm responsible for this, and then that I need to do something about it. It was the moment I decided to move into sustainability. I had no idea what to do next. So I started doing research. That's what marketers do. And that's how I discovered ISO 14001. So I had experience with systems, implementing innovation systems before, but I thought this one was better. So I went to, so to speak, ISO school. So the first ISO system, 19001, was the quality system, was launched in 1987 to facilitate global trade. 14001 was introduced in 1996, almost a decade later, when sustainability started to become important globally. There are about 40 systems now. So why did I think ISO 14001 was so great? So number one, it works for any kind and size of company, anywhere, which I found amazing. In fact, ISO doesn't talk about company, it talks about organization, because it applies also to nonprofits and also to government organizations and others. But it's practical, easy to understand, realistic, methodical, user-friendly, if you know how to read it, yet seriously committed to the environment. Now, the big multinational companies embraced it. It gave them the best credibility globally, also generated efficiencies with cost savings, risk reduction, increased brand reputation, and business growth as a result. So lots of benefits. So now, how does it work? ISO 14001 uses the same system as ISO 9001, and now all the other 40 system, 38, right? Plan, do, check, act. Some of you know it well because you most probably have ISO 14001. Now, just a notice, having a carbon emissions management system in place to begin with, even before you start Plan, Do, Check, Act, and especially when you start it, is helpful at every step. Okay, so first you plan. You look at your company activities and identify their negative impacts on the environment. It means going through what resources you take from the environment and what you discharge on the environment, and also how you do it. It helps if you already have carbon management data, as I said, which you put in place perhaps at the request of your customers or to comply with regulatory requirements that you have it. So we have customers like that. You also look at how you comply with environmental laws and regulations yourself as the customer. That's the base. You have to comply with environmental laws and regulations before you do ISO, which is a voluntary standard. And then you do a few more things to get a picture of where you are, basically looking at risks and opportunities. So next, based on all that information, you create a policy and objectives. What are objectives? These are projects you do to mitigate negative impacts. For example, reducing the use of energy or water or material or other resources, reducing waste, and more innovative solutions. If you have significant impacts on the environment, you have to address them. Otherwise, it's greenwashing. That's why ISO is serious. Now, what do you do if you have an activity that has significant impacts on the environment and you don't have a solution to address it? So here's a great way to do this. It's called a feasibility study. It means dedicating an amount of time and resources to search for possible solutions. Having carbon information handy helps. So the feasibility study was taught to me by my teacher and mentor, Randy Sinyukov, who recently got the 2026 Eco Impact Award. Thank you, ISO. Thank you, Randy. Now, objectives. Those things you put in place have to be smart, specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time-bound. Measurable means using a carbon emission management process. Now, let's say you don't have it in place before starting to plan. You can implement it as an objective of the system, which I indicate in many cases. Relevant means relevant to the findings of your specific impacts and risks and opportunities. So you created the plan, including the impacts and the objective. Now comes the do part. You do the actual work to achieve these objectives. You communicate, you document, you manage, you train. There's a few other things. Those who know it, it's non-conformities, other things. Your carbon emissions data is there for you as you track your projects, and it really helps. So talking about tracking, plan, do, now comes check. Check is auditing periodically to ensure you're on track. There are internal audits and external audits and certification audits. Certification audits, if you did it right and you pass a certification audit. It really helps to have the carbon management information for all this evaluation, especially your internal audits and your external audits. You can see the progress from audit to audit. And at the end of the cycle, you do a review, an annual review. And then you repeat the plan, do, check, act cycle with continual improvement. both the system itself and your activities out there. So, carbon measurement is important in evaluating impacts, in creating great objectives, and in tracking performance. So, the Carbonhound method, which Lauren will show you next, helps with creating a system based on real information. It ensures that all the work done through Plan, Do, Check, Act is validated. There is a validation system, by the way. Now, remember I told you the big multinationals have ISO 14001? But 99%, the majority of businesses are medium and small, and most don't have it. Research says for three reasons: money, time, and know how. Money, because profit margins are slim, there's not a lot of money going around, as well as time. Everybody wears many hats, there's not a lot of human resources. And know how, they don't have big familiarity with with systems in general. So the challenge is to make ISO 14001 available to them too, by making it easy to use and affordable. So we worked hard to achieve this with our Greenmark online platform. And I'm going to show you just a snapshot of our onboarding and user dashboard. If you'd like a demo, the contact info will be available here. And please feel free to ask questions in the chat. Thank you very much.
Great. So just as Shirley mentioned here, going to show you this quick snapshot, as she mentioned, of the platform. And thank you so much, Shirley, for that overview. It's really helpful. I think something that you said really resonates with a lot of our customers, which is it's not that they don't want to do it, it's that it sounds expensive and it sounds difficult and they don't have the resources, to do that. So definitely appreciate you breaking down the process. And I have some questions for you, but I'll save my questions for the end as well.
Okay, I hope they're not too hard. So how did we make it easier? What you see is just a snapshot of our online platform. On the right, you see this is just one little piece from the onboarding and the official EMS that used to be a big binder with a ton of information and charts and so on. What you see on the left is the user dashboard available to the users of the system. And it has everything. It's a lot longer. So you have your EMS system too, which, by the way, has paragraphs with learning and with examples so that every little step is clear. And we do it together. I coach the onboarding. Now, in addition to that, you also have in the system the summary, which it says EMS launch document summary, which without the learnings, which you can always go back to see, and without the examples, just your system to focus on what you do. Then there's a few other things. What's important is the objectives, because all year you work with the objectives, the projects. So we put them the third time here, highlighted with the procedures and the time bound and everything that you need. So you have them. Non-conformities I mentioned is if you screw up, you have to document, you put in place something. For example, you hired a new employee who wasn't trained. Sorry, you put something in place to fix it. The big one is next is audits. Everything is there. All the audits are there. All the information is there, including documents and links that you can put in the system. And then the annual management review, links and documents, and other resources, a lot of other resources. So I'd love to show you a demo. There will be the contact info, so please feel free to contact me. I love our system, so I'm always willing to present it. Thank you so much.
Great. Yeah. And just for everybody that's watching right now, the reason that we're excited to share this work with Shirley and the parallels between Greenmark and Carbonhound is this shared vision of making these seemingly complicated processes a little bit easier by leveraging software and by showing you a kind of step by step look at how these things can be done and putting the scientific technical language into English, right? So it's a lot of the work that Shirley's done with Greenmark. And now I'll go into just a really brief overview about greenhouse gas emissions. Shirley already explained kind of where they fit into 14,001. But similarly, measuring your greenhouse gas emissions can seem like a really daunting task. It can sound complicated. You know, there's these international standards, and what data do I need? Our goal is really to help people understand that it can be accessible and it can be affordable. And it doesn't have to be a 2 year long project, and it doesn't have to be $100,000 investment or anything like that. So um, we'll send out the contact information for Shirley and for Carbon Hound at the end. Um, Again, please leave your comments and questions for Shirley in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. And now I will share a little bit about greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so we'll just start from kind of a high level overview of what are greenhouse gas emissions and how are they categorized. And this is really important to kind of understand where you should focus your energy and how this measurement is done. So, greenhouse gas emissions for corporations, nonprofits, organizations, similar to ISO 14001, um, are measured in the carbon dioxide equivalent. But that CO2e or carbon dioxide equivalent is actually made up of a few different greenhouse gas emissions, which is why you get greenhouse gas emissions measured in carbon dioxide equivalent. The greenhouse gas protocol and kind of breaks your emissions down into three categories or scopes. And your scope one emissions are going to be the things that you can directly control from your owned assets and facilities. So if I'm a manufacturing company and I make, I don't know, uh, a frozen fish or something like that, my direct emissions, scope one emissions, are going to be the emissions from my owned factories or facilities or offices um, in terms of like things that you're burning on site. So any owned machinery that uses propane or diesel. And then we're also going to be looking at the emissions from our company owned vehicles. So if I've got a fleet of delivery trucks and maybe a company car to go around, we want to know what are the emissions from the fuel that are powering those trucks. Um, and those are in scope one because you can directly control how much gas you use in your owned vehicle, for example. Scope 2 emissions are also in your control such that you can control how much you use. And really, what we're talking about here is your purchased electricity and your heating and cooling. So think of this as, you know, your gas bill and your electricity bill. You can control how much you use as a company, but you don't have any control over how that energy was produced. If your grid is on coal, it's on coal. If your grid is on hydro, it's on hydro. So that's why they put it in scope two, because you're starting to lose as much control over those emissions. Scope three emissions are everything in your value chain that help your business run and are necessary for your business, but you have a little bit less control over because it has to do with things like the things that you purchase. So, your ingredients, your packaging, your accounting software, um, the transportation of your products to and from your facilities. It takes into consideration, you know, your employee travel and employee commuting. And scope three is really going to be, for most companies, the lion's share of your overall emissions, and it's divided into 15 categories. We don't need to get into every single one of those, but the idea here is it's capturing everything that happens to make your business run that you don't have control over directly. what's the math behind how this is actually calculated? This is the question that we get most often with companies who are just starting this work is like, okay, that all sounds good, but what data do you need from me? And how do you turn that data into emissions? So the first step is measuring. So we're going to take your business usage data that will be the kilowatt hours of electricity that you purchase every year or every month, or the tons of grain that you purchase to make your bread. And we're going to take that usage data and multiply it by what's called an emission factor. And that will turn that usage data into carbon dioxide equivalent, or CO2e. So we're going to take all of that usage data across your whole business, multiply each of those pieces of data by an emission factor, turn it into carbon dioxide, and that will give you your emissions as a company or as an organization. Typically, folks that we work with are doing this because they have to report, which is both fun and tedious at the same time. Um, but similar to the reasons that we've heard folks needing to or wanting to do ISO 14001, it could be because you want to include it in your annual report because your investors or your stakeholders are asking about your program for EMS or for your goals for sustainability. It could be you have a customer who says, "Hey, I need your emissions data because I'm measuring my emissions." And so you get all of these unique requests from a whole bunch of your customers, like Costco or Walmart or Ford or something like that. Maybe you're a company that cares a lot about sustainability and it's part of your values, and you're doing this because you want, B Corp certification, or to really, market your products as being a green product, and you want to do that with real quantified data. That might be another reason that you do this work. And then the less fun reasons are regulatory. So, depending on your industry or the size of your company, or what you're exporting to where, it might be a requirement to do business to report or disclose the emissions associated with your business. Obviously, similar to 14,001, this is where the act comes in, but we obviously are looking to do something with the data once we've created this data. So it's not just reporting for reporting's sake. How can you leverage that data to make your business more efficient, right? Identify where you can reduce, identify what's really expensive, identify kind of what quality data is coming in and how to improve that over time. Um, and ultimately, leverage all of this data to get a better understanding of your business, not just from an environmental perspective, but for the whole health of your organization. So, similar to, there's lots of different ways that somebody might approach 14,001 or greenhouse gas emissions calculation, or both, right? You might hire a consultant, external consultant, to guide you through this work. You might say, I'm going to learn everything myself and do everything myself, and then just get someone to come in and certify, or maybe just get someone to audit my work. You might hire different software products similar to, Greenmark and Carbonhound, to help you through this process and to give you a bit more support along the way. There's lots of different ways that companies might do this, and it can be really overwhelming to kind of navigate those options. But ultimately, the solution that works for your company is going to be what is the most empowering to you and gives you the confidence you need to report on what you have to report. So I'll just really quickly show you a snapshot of, you know, what using software can look like. But Carbonhound is a software as well as human people who talk to you and help you through the process. But in the software, what we're doing is we're really trying to automate that data collection process, or the tedious kind of, uh, you know, the work that doesn't bring a lot of value, um, and display the data in a way that's ultimately helpful for you. So we kind of automate the collection of those utility bills, automate the collection of your invoices from your suppliers, automate the collection of your fuel consumption from fuel cards. All of that data, we kind of expedite the process and take it off your hands, and then provide the data in whatever format you need to meet those customer requests, regulatory requests, or if we're working towards ISO 14001, to say, yes, they've set their baseline, they've measured their emissions, maybe they set a target. That's kind of proof of the action that you might take as part of your 14,001. Um, so that was everything that Shirley and I had to present on. Shirley, if you have any questions for me, I have some questions for you, and then we'll take some questions from the audience as well.
Thank you. Just that this is so helpful. And when we started, and we have a little one system where no, don't worry, this is not competition to Carbonhound. But customers were overwhelmed to have to do a quantitative. We have has a long name. It says a summary of all of these. And we were told at the beginning by one or two companies, this is why your business will fail, because it's too hard to do this. So the truth is, it's wonderful to have the software that you're saying. Well, they were proven wrong, right? And first of all, many companies have a system like your system or others, and especially those that have to report. We found more and more legislation is out there to ask everybody to have measured impacts. So it's wonderful that you do that, and for us to say, yeah, it's not so hard to do.
Yeah, definitely. I think what's important, and you're touching on, and actually one of the questions which I'll pull up now, is kind of that credibility. And for small and medium businesses, how do you get confident in your data and trust that the people who are doing this calculation for you are, meeting the standards of quality that you can really feel confident in the data that you put out there. So I'll go through some questions from the audience now, and then
Go
if we
ahead.
have time, I'll ask my questions because the audience ones are more important. Um, okay, this first question is from Ron, um, and they say, if a company lacks carbon management data and is flying blind regarding their environmental impact, can create risks in a business landscape that demands transparency. So the question is, what should a company do that lacks the data if they don't have the expertise, um, time, or experience to implement and pass an audit if they can't hire a full-time sustainability leader? So I guess the question is kind of saying, what would your recommendation be, or what should a company do if they don't feel like they have the time, expertise, or experience to actually pass an audit or to pass the certification? I guess what should they do, or where can they start?
Okay, so carbon management, you have to do all the steps that ISO requires. And the reason I went into this, and I love this, I said, because it's very practical. You actually can do most of it or all of it if you dedicate the resources. And in a way, small business is not bad because they have to count every penny. They have to look at their bills. And surprisingly, many of them have the information. And then we come and we say, put it in this format. But really, when you're talking about medium, and that's about small. But if you're talking about medium companies, almost all of them have to report, and they would have this help. And we would indicate to them. Or they do have, many already have a health and safety manager that becomes also the environmental manager. And they're used to this because they're used to having to report and to get reports and to give them to the government. And they can get snapshot, not ongoing. So what's amazing about your system is that it's an ongoing way of recording. But some will do snapshots of pieces of what they do and certain specific impacts that they want to look at. And that's acceptable as long as you are honestly reporting, and most of them want to do it. They actually benefit because they generate savings. Like when you look at your waste and you look at your energy, that's mostly what they do. And there's lots of saving. ISO pays for itself, especially when it's so affordable as when we do it. I hope it helped. But if you want more, I could show you more. I didn't go in the user dashboard on how we do it. We usually have a document and we say, okay, fill this out, go and put in all of these, how much you do hydro, how much you do this. And they hate it. It's like you say, it's doing that tedious work that they don't have time for. So ideally, they are able to afford for an affordable system to do it for them. But if not, they have to do it.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at, which I think is important for people to understand in small and medium businesses, is for 14,001, a lot of it is actually just documenting a lot of the work you're already doing, right? It's kind of saying, okay, well, we just want the information to know that you're thinking about this, right? And you have a kind of a plan. Um, right, and you don't have to do everything all at once. So I think there's so much stress around, okay, well, once we start measuring, now we have to do this, this, and this, and this just to reduce. But we really want to meet you where you're at. And so if you don't feel like you have the data or you feel like it's going to be too much work to collect it, it's when it can be valuable to chat with folks who've done it before and ask them, hey, how much time did this actually take you? Right. So for a company with two or three facilities, or even just one facility, um, we typically say that to go from having never done it before to having a greenhouse gas protocol aligned inventory for your business takes about a month and a half, as long as we have access to that primary data. So you can really go from nothing to greenhouse gas protocol aligned in a month, month and a half. Again, if you just kind of dedicate that initial few weeks to setting up that data automation.
So a couple of things. ISO 14001 was, since 1996 was 2004. And then in 2015, there was a radical change, which was making it more business friendly. And what means that when you look at your impacts and what you're doing, you already are doing certain things. Maybe they're not organized just because somebody said, let's do this, let's do that. And when you organize the system, what you do is you start at the point of where you are in the middle of your project. If you already have a project, that project becomes an objective, and you go from there. Maybe you've already done the initial work into it, and you have already done half the work. You have analyzed, you have come up with a solution, and now you're just implementing. Okay, so you put in the plan just the implementation. Just to mention, there is a new system coming out. Just by the end of this month, it will be approved globally as ISO 20026. So I like it because it will look like we're very in line with the times, because until now it's still 2015. So it'll make it more clear to understand. That was their objective. So I think they were reacting to the fact that people said it was a little bit hard to understand. Although if you took the time, or a consultant or whatever that knows, you would learn. Even from this presentation, I think you get a lot. So yes, you three things. You don't have to forget about the things you're already doing. You put them as part of the system. They are very valuable. You just continue them. You don't attack everything at the same time. This is one of the misnomers. Everybody says, okay, we have these impacts. Okay, we have to address significant impacts, but you don't attack everything at the same time, because you have to commit to systems. So you use, and often my objective is to temper down the expectation. Oh, we're going to lower 30% electricity. I say, really? Let's look. Can you do such a thing? It's not easy. It ends up being 7 or 10 max. So it's good to have the Carbonhound numbers. And the other way is hard work. So ISO is very, I mentioned it's user friendly, it's reasonable. You're not supposed to do overwhelming objectives, and that's the job of the person doing the coaching and helping to develop the system, unless you do it yourself with someone who is like the you have a sustainability manager. And we have companies like that that know and know that no, no, you don't attack it. It's really reasonable. You put in the number of objectives that make sense.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. Um, cool. Okay, so we've got another question here, and this person is asking, um, there's people who are underqualified in certain areas, and then they themselves start a business in this work, or they try to make these reports, and they're saying there's there's so many low quality products and services for this type of work, whether I guess it's greenhouse gas accounting or environmental management systems. So the question is, do you think the government can mandate it across all sectors? I think this would save a lot of inferior goods and services from generating excessive waste. So I guess the question is around, how do we uh, mandate kind of standards across reporting and measuring on these things so that there's transparency, or a quality bar that has to be hit, so that people can't just say we calculated it or we did it and then go on their way.
So, as I said, ISO is a voluntary system. It's very respected, it's very appreciated, but it's not a legal requirement. What governments do with environmental, legal, and regulatory, they put in place everything that they demand of businesses to operate environmentally in a sound way. So that's what the government does. The government is not a regulating business of whoever practices either auditing or measurement. So buyer beware, right? In a way, there are standards because uh, there's a lot of training of auditors. There is a lot of passion too from the people that practice. And like in every area, there are bad apples, but overall, there's a lot of commitment to this. Now, I was speaking last fall with a high level environmental expert that knows and said, yes, there was last year, or I'm not sure over how long, complaints about what the person said, maybe not sufficiently well done. She didn't specify, but there are many that do a fantastic job. So I know them, and if you are not happy with who you got and you don't feel that you got the service, and you're committed to the environment, there are others that are certified. It's not easy to become an auditor. It's humongous work to be registered, and there's ISO 2046 that is very hard to pass. So, like in every business, you have excellent, you have medium, and you have low. Just try to find the best.
Yeah, I'll speak to it definitely from a emissions reporting perspective. Depending on why you're reporting this data, I totally agree that there's a really big range in the quality of data that's going in to calculate these calculations, and a bit of a gray box in terms of the methodology that people might be using to generate their scope 1 and 2 data. Um, I think if you're looking for a credible solution for measuring your emissions, and you want to get a third party to do that work and not take that risk on yourself, it's asking questions like, what is your experience? Have your inventories been published as part of other companies, required regulatory reporting or public reporting? And then really importantly, what's the methodology that you follow? And do you have any verification to kind of prove that that is being followed? So for us at Carbonhound, we have a third party ISO accredited body come in and check our methodology and our emission factors every year, so that we can say with confidence our platform, methodology, emission factors, that part of it is in line with ISO 064 and the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So I think it's just having the wherewithal to ask those additional questions before you start working with someone. Um, and then there's other really interesting ways that governments or regulations have tried to kind of crack down on the greenwashing of it all. So in Canada, there's the BC 59, and in that one, they say if you're going to publish on your website or say publicly that you are net zero or you're super green or whatever, or you're making any sort of claim, that has to be backed up by credible, transparent data or methodology, to kind of prove that. You can't just make that claim. Otherwise, you expose yourself to anyone actually kind of calling it into the competition bureau and kind of putting you on blast, if you will. So there are ways that governments have tried to put that quality bar a little bit higher, acknowledging that there is a lot of room for generous descriptions of environmental practices that companies are doing. So yeah, it's a really good question, and it's a challenge, but especially in the voluntary market. But yeah, it's being worked on.
And it's a very good answer.
Awesome. Okay, question from somebody else. This one might be more for me, but I know you're an expert here too. So, do you know how the emission factor is calculated? Do you enter data based on location, time of year, age of infrastructure and equipment, type of equipment, etc., and then your emission factor is generated? I feel like the ones taken from the EPA or IPCC only gives a surface number without a great deal of accuracy. Okay, I'll start this one, and then if you have anything to add, Shirley, jump
No, this is yours.
in. Okay. Um, this is a great question about data quality. So, in calculating your greenhouse gas emissions, you have the usage data or the business data going in on one side, and then you multiply it by the emission factor. Both the usage data or the kind of raw business data and the emission factor can vary greatly in terms of quality and specificity. So, your usage data, in this case, if you're saying, okay, I want my emissions for my office electricity, but I don't have the bill, we might use a approximate square footage of your office instead of the kilowatt hours that you used, and we'll multiply that by an emission factor. So on the data quality side, lower data quality is going to be square footage and location. Higher quality data is going to be the kilowatt hours from your service provider. On the emission factor side, that's quality of that emission factor can change as well. So, like you said, if the EPA or IPCC has emission factors for that area or for that state or for that province, that might be what we use. But a better quality emission factor would be the emissions from your specific utility company, right? So there's different levels of quality when it comes to emission factors, and we will always try to get the best quality emission factor possible and then kind of work backwards from there. Same thing for anything that you purchase or any of your vehicles in your example as well. If like you've got equipment, um, if we don't know, if there hasn't been a study done, or you buy a John Deere piece of equipment and it's a tractor, we could use an emission factor that says tractors in North America. And that would be a good emission factor, but not a great emission factor. A better emission factor would be to say, hey, John Deere, what were your emissions specifically as the very specific creator, producer, supplier of that tractor? And we would use that emission factor as the real emission factor in a best case scenario. So, yes, the quality varies in both usage data and emission factor data, and we will always try to get the best one possible. And over time, these are the types of things that you can set as goals to improve your process or to kind of improve your footprint.
You can make it an objective.
True. Yes. Yeah, it's great. So, one of the objectives could be start measuring my emissions, or it could be do my scope 3 emissions or do a supplier engagement, program or something like that. Okay, question for you, Shirley. Okay, what is the role of compliance obligations in an EMS system?
So, as I mentioned, you have to look at your impacts on the environment and create objectives to mitigate. But at the base level, as I said, is you have to comply with environmental laws and regulations. So that's the only part about compliance. When you talk about ISO, is talking about conformance, conforming to the standard. It compliance has to do with legal obligations. So one interesting thing, well, you comply because you comply. You have to comply, and it would be really greenwashing if ISO 14001 allowed you to not even consider your legal obligations. But I find interesting and over time learn to ask and to look at that to create what's called a legal register, because you can get a lot of ideas of objectives of what to do from your compliance obligations. And if you see that something's missing, you make it an objective. So to improve the whole system also helps to avoid the risks from not complying with legislation. So let's say a company uh, does ISO 14001, and here's the legal register, and they realize, oops, we haven't complied with something. It really helps them to start complying with everything that they should, and it helps creating objectives of improvement. Nobody wants to catch anybody. Everybody wants to make sure that we improve all the time. So from where you are, you want to improve your compliance obligations, and ISO may help you do so.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you so much. And I think for everybody out there as well, I just wanted to really reiterate that for what Greenmark offers is that audit and review and the kind of check to say, yes, somebody as a third party has looked at all of this and kind of checked it, as opposed to just, doing it for the sake of doing it. So there is that level of, confidence.
As I said, I come from innovation and new products, and my big goal is to create objectives that move us forward. It's not as much as auditing. So here's to say that when I was studying auditing, I said, if you help someone create a system, you can't be their auditor. And I said, that's amazing. So there's so many auditors, certifying auditors, and other consulting auditors. And I said, I don't want to be I took the training and I passed, and it wasn't easy. I said, I don't want to be a policeman. I want to help them coach them to create their system. That's my joy. And then customers said, what are you talking about? We love our auditors. They are go around, they get ideas, they help us. They really are for us, and we wait for them to come and audit. Now, you don't want to wait and get, non-conformities and whatever. And that's why we do extra audits here that are not certifying audits, but just to help you go through, because you may get with a certifying audit once a year. But we went to the point where we do actually from the beginning 4 audits a year, which is a lot. And we bother the company 4 times a year just to make sure that they stay on track, and we are with them because we feel responsible.
Yeah, awesome. I appreciate you reinforcing the whole point is that we take action and not just audit. I'm just conscious that so many people are doing this because they feel like they have to. So yeah, it's kind of that balance between, you know, okay, I know we have to do this, but how do we turn this into something that's really valuable and make an impact while we're at it?
So an auditor can be actually a coach to help develop the system. And then you have auditors that audit the system and certify the system. And in theory, so ISO has 4 ways of doing it. First is self-declaration. So a company can do it by herself and or itself, and just declare we are conforming with ISO 14001. Uh, the second level is a customer. For example, you mentioned Walmart. Because they commit to having their supply chain green, what they do is they are doing it for small companies that sell through them. So a customer helping the audits is a second possibility. And then you have third parties that come and do audits, which are auditors and certifiers that are some are accredited and some are not, and that's okay. Both are acceptable. And the main thing is that we move the needle forward environmentally. Everything helps. Every small company that puts it in place is a step forward for all of us.
Awesome. Okay. I have one more question, and then that'll be the last question before we wrap things up. And like I said, if you're still listening, make sure that you register on the registration so that you can get the follow up information, the recording, and our contact information. Okay.
And if you want
Sorry,
a demo, I'm loving to give a demo of our system, because that was just a taste, a snapshot.
for sure. Likewise. Okay, what features does Carbonhound have that helps clients achieving or maintaining ISO 14001? Is it centered around carbon accounting, or are there other features that would apply? It's a really good question. So I'll try to answer, but Shirley, please correct me. Um, so within Carbonhound, the main focus for us is emissions measurement. But along with that, we are also oftentimes collecting all of your waste data, all of your water usage data, both in terms of your usage as well as the cost and as well as the turning it into emissions. So those are elements that can help you, I believe, with 14001 as well. And then the other piece of it that we're really excited about that's becoming more a part of what we are working with companies on is tracking initiatives. So, tracking any reduction initiatives, again, in terms of usage, emissions, and cost. So, as part of the objectives for 14001, you might say one of my objectives is to electrify my fleet or to reduce my emissions or usage of water from this site by 30%. And in Carbonhound, what you could actually do is you could track that initiative against your baseline and then show over the course of that project how much your emissions have reduced, how much money you've saved, and how much usage has decreased by implementing that project. So those are the short ways I can think of. But yeah, Shirley, if you have anything else or
So
if you want to
that
correct me.
no, there's nothing. That's exactly it. So that's exactly. Remember, I said that objectives have to be measurable.
Mm,
So when you say that you're going to reduce X%, how do you know that you did that? So using data, otherwise, there's also quantitative data, but it's absolutely necessary to measure as you go and to improve the system as you create more ambitious objectives. Absolutely, it helps. It's essential to getting certified.
yeah. And I will also say that if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I did my big solar project 5 years ago, how do I show the impact of that? For maybe your 14,001, that's not something that's going to be a new objective, but we can pull all of your historical data. So if you still want to know what the impact of that project was, we still want you to be able to quantify that. So again, that doesn't necessarily change anything moving forward, but it can still help you prove the value of that solar panel installation that can help justify the next project as well.
So
Uh,
you mentioned about that. So I didn't say when you look at your impact on the environment, you have negative impacts, right? But you also have positive. Reducing is positive. So when you click and you say, okay, we have here a negative impact, air pollution, water pollution, um, whatever, you also list your reducing of impacts, which is called positive impacts on the environment. So you get, so to speak, those brownie points. Measure the best.
Totally. Okay, amazing. Well, thank you so much to everybody in the audience for all of your questions and for showing up over a sleepy post lunch period. Um, we're really appreciative of everybody's engagement and would love to continue the conversation or just answer any questions that other people might have after this. So I'll send around our contact information. And please feel free to reach out to either of us on LinkedIn or by email. Would love to chat with you and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.